Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson. Presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is, what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk building, it's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's being 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
If you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
and you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BSing, no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record
I
button?
thought I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? The Elk Talk Podcast is brought to you by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, ensuring the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. To become a member, go to rmef.org.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by Mountain Ops, making outdoor energy and performance nutrition to make you a stronger and healthier elk hunter. They have a full line of hunting-related supplements, including meal replacement shakes, multivitamins, pre-workout fuel, and post-workout recovery. And my favorite, their new performance protein bars that, by the way, are packed with 270 calories and 20 grams of protein, but contain less than 6 grams of sugar. Visit mountainops.com to learn more and to order, and be sure to use the promo code ELKTALK to save on your next order.
The podcast is also brought to you by Gerber. Go to gerbergear.com and learn about the knives, the Vital, the Big Game Vital, the Gator Premium, all the things that we use when we're out in the woods, and not just knives, but also some really cool multi-tools that they have.
And we have a promo code for Gerber as well. Just use the code ELKTALK to save 20% on your orders at gerbergear.com. And we are also brought to you by Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls. And Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls is the original designer and inventor of the pallet plate diaphragm that's completely changed the way elk calls are made and used. And to find out more and to order your elk calls, go to RockyMountainHuntingCalls.com or BuglingBull.com and use promo code ELKTALK, and you're going to save 15% on all of your elk calls and elk call accessories.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by GoHunt.com. Go to GoHunt.com and sign up for the Insider. The Insider is changing how hunts and hunting information are found. No doubt about that. Use promo code ELKTALK, and when you sign up for the Insider, you're going to get $50 of store credit, mad money, in their gear shop.
Lastly, the University of Elk Hunting online course is a proud partner of the Elk Talk Podcast. And within the University of Elk Hunting online course, you're going to find nearly 60 chapters organized in 17 modules of elk hunting instruction aimed at making you a more successful elk hunter. From planning and e-scouting to calling strategies and packing, every imaginable elk hunting topic is included in the online course. And regardless of your previous elk hunting experience or success, I'm confident the University of Elk Hunting online course will make you a more confident, more successful elk hunter. Just visit elk101.com and use the promo code ELKTALK to save 20% when you sign up for a membership to the University of Elk Hunting online course.
And with that, Corey, we are ready to get into it.
Let's jump into it.
Well, Corey, how you doing today?
I am doing fabulous today.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear you didn't get thrown in jail in Mexico.
I was just going to say I'm back on home soil, and most of the snow melted while we were gone, and I understand the elk are dropping antlers right now, so life is good.
Oh man, how did we get you away from the mountains when elk are dropping antlers?
I tell you what, I sat on a beach in Mexico with a pina colada in my hand, daydreaming about picking up brown elk antlers.
Well, since we got you off the mountain, I think we're really blessed to have another guest with us today. We've been working on this one for a while. Gabe Jenkins from Kentucky. Is it Fish and Wildlife, or is it Wildlife, or what is it, Gabe?
So we are the Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources.
Resources from the state of Kentucky. Because Corey and I have been, I guess, is it fair to say, Corey, we've dreamed about hunting elk in Kentucky for a while?
Man, I apply every year. So, yeah, I dream about it.
So we're blessed to have Gabe with us. Gabe, you were a field biologist for quite a while before you became the director of all these other things that are now part of your job.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in elk for 14 and a half years as both a field biologist and also the elk coordinator. So done a variety of things from on the ground to management to supervision, and elk is my passion for sure.
Well, you're on the right podcast, Gabe.
That's right, man. I'm stoked to be here. Absolutely.
Corey and I we lucked out, and when we got in touch with you, you sent us your elk management plan. For you guys run on a 15-year plan. We'll touch on a lot of that, but before we get into that, can you give us the background of how in the heck you guys pulled it off in a state with as much private land, as much agriculture as you have, that you now have, I don't know, 10, 12, 14,000 elk? You probably don't want to tell how many elk you really have. You might have someone say you got too many.
Right. Too many or not enough. We've all got our opinions, right? So, but it is a great question. And why elk? Why Kentucky? Why did we even go down this route? And really for us, it was kind of the next step in a very long tradition of species restoration. When you look at Kentucky, our story is very similar to all of the other eastern states. Is that we lost a lot of our major game animals, whether that was turkey or waterfowl, or not waterfowl, but turkey or deer or otter and elk. And so, for us in the agency, we were finishing up a lot of those major restoration projects. Whitetail deer, we had as few as 1,000 in the state of Kentucky. Where now we have well over 1 million, and they were just in one small little spot in western Kentucky. And so we worked for literally a half a century to restore deer and brought in deer and let populations grow to where we were still moving and restocking deer in the 90s. You have a very similar conversation. It's crazy to think 90s and we were still moving deer, but the last movement of deer where we captured and released them was 1999. And we'll get into some dates in elk, but that kind of has a tie to it. So, we're moving, releasing deer. Same thing with turkeys. Our turkey project, where we were turning turkeys loose all across the state, wrapped up. Otters were finished. And so, we were looking at, kind of what's next. And we had interest from our oversight commission board to look at elk. I know there were elk in the Smokies. There were elk in a captive facility in western Kentucky. I know Michigan had some, Wisconsin had a few, and so that conversation started, and it really moved very quickly. We had two board members specifically, Tom Baker, and then another board member, Doug Hensley, who had this interest and really the push, and we had the expertise as an agency from species restoration, and it kind of took off. We did a feasibility study where we looked at the entire state and said, what do elk need? What is all the other, other factors that you have to consider when you look at elk, as far as agriculture and road networks and habitat size and all the things we think about with elk, and then where would they fit? And it really came back to, there were three kind of major places in the state that it could work habitat-wise, but eastern Kentucky really jumped out to us. It was the best opportunity. And so right after that feasibility study was done, we went right out to the public, had a few meetings to see how the public supported it. Overwhelming support, and that would have been in 97, in the spring of 97. And fast forward a few months, and we had a load of elk, and we were coming across the country with elk. And just that bang, bang, bang. And so that was 97. And going back, back to our deer conversation, we were still moving deer in 97 in the same place we were turning elk loose. So the landowners, the hunters and people that lived there already were familiar with this process of capturing game animals and turning them loose. So it to them was like, well, that kind of makes sense. And so off we went into this beautiful project that we have now.
Wow. That's just incredible. You think the pace at which a lot of things move in agencies, you guys set a land speed record.
It was. It really was. And, but it's also kind of by design. And when you have the stars align and you have the support and the willingness, you need to try to go. And we were being pushed by board members who have a shelf life, and we had the support and realized there could be a shelf life to that as well. So, I've seen that firsthand in experiences with other states, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, that we've been involved with, where same concept, just at a smaller scale, as they all of a sudden had the support, we got to go now, and off they went.
Well, and I think it's so interesting. I was just going to say, I hunted elk in Alaska this last fall, and they did a translocation several years ago, and I think they did like 25 or 16, 50 elk, little numbers, and it takes forever for that population to catch and grow. What was the total number that were brought into Kentucky?
1,541. So if you're going to go, you might as well go big, right?
Go big or go home.
We did that. And there were a couple reasons, right? Like, we know go big and it makes sense, but also when you looked at other eastern elk restoration projects, they were small and they were disjunct herds coming from one local population. And when you look at elk and you look at the history of elk and the numbers across the country, they're fairly genetically bottlenecked back to that Yellowstone herd. And so you already have some concerns on genetic diversity. And so if you're only going to take a few and all those few have very similar lineages, you might be setting yourself up for failure, a half a century or a century down the road. So you've got that. And then some disease concerns. We can get into that a little more specific if you'd like, but disease concerns, and when you've got low numbers, you just might not have the viability for long-term success. And so that was really the push on our end, was if we're going to go big, if we want this to be successful, we need to set ourselves up for a very diverse, genetically diverse population, to where this population will thrive through perpetuity, knowing that there's very high likelihood there will not be connectivity with any source population for a long, long time.
That makes sense. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Didn't they come from a multitude of different states?
So they did. Came from 6 different states: North Dakota, Kansas, Utah, Oregon, New Mexico. Is that 6?
Close enough.
Yeah, no, I can't. What kind of a biologist am I? I can't even count to 6.
Well, if we forgot one of them, our apologies. And thanks to all of them who contributed. So, how hard is it to transport elk, though, from Oregon or Utah or somewhere? I mean, it seems like you throw them in a horse trailer and they got to get out and stretch and water and take care of their business once in a while.
It's hammered down. I was not a part of that. I would have loved to have been here during that time, and talking to some of our senior biologists that are still here, and while I was with the agency, it was literally load them on a truck, and for the most part we use semis, the typical cattle trailer hauler, and they don't stop. You go 24/7 as fast as you can get across the country, because really time is of the essence of that point. Like you said, you can't just stop and let them out and stretch them like you do your horse, right? So you gotta move fast, and they do real well. I mean, there's all kinds of stories floating around, whether they're true or not, about storms and wrecking vehicles coming across the country. We were moving elk in the winter, so you're coming across the plains and you hit a snowstorm and sub-zero temperatures. Those are all all had impacts on their timing. So they did have a law enforcement escort from our agency just to try to help them move through along. But they're coming across Kansas and Kansas City and St. Louis and all the major cities for a lot of them to get to Kentucky. So pretty nuts.
That's just so remarkable. And how many can you fit in a trailer? 10, 15?
No, on a semi, you can pack them in there pretty tight, 30 or 40 easily.
Okay.
Yeah,
but even at 30, that's 50 trailer loads.
Yeah, and we also tried to pick young elk. We had some mature cows, but we did not bring in bulls of any maturity. Most of them were just spikes or bull calves, so that helped. An adult bull is just a pain in the butt. I mean, that's about all he's good for, is a pain in the butt, or to be shot by a hunter, right? That's the glory of a bull elk. So, yeah.
So you mean you don't want to be the guy collaring or netting that 700-pound beast with 6 big tines on each antler?
No, been there, done that. I can experience that. Check that off the list, and it's not something that I would say is I want to go do again. So,
well, I do have to say, if you're gonna get spike elk and bring them into Kentucky, selecting Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah is probably a pretty good place to get them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we knew they were packing the genetics they needed, and then you put them on our food resources, and then our very easy winners. It was a recipe for success for sure.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's some Merriam's elk genetics in there, because you lost all your Eastern elk genetics, right, in the 1800s or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. Pre-Civil War, the last known elk was gone at this point in Kentucky. Whoa. So you talk about the Merriam's. Yeah, I think we see that. So one thing that I see in a lot of our elk and just antler characteristics is very dark antlered, and also a lot of crowning, and which is what you see in that subspecies. And so, I mean, for a big, mature 8 or 9 year old bull here, you're going to see some crowning. You're going to see, you don't see them very typical at that age class. They're going to be more of a non-typical with crowns here and there, and just some of that characteristic. So is it a dominant trait? Probably not. But do we have some of that genetic in our herd? Probably so.
We're starting some myths, some
rumors,
some mysteries here.
You guys talked about Randy on your unveil on the size of our elk, so that's 100% legit. A bull elk for us, a big prime adult bull, he can weigh 900 pounds easily pre-rut. They just look like toads, So whatever you want to call them, but just some monster critters come late August.
Well, that one you shot in Alaska, Corey, looking at the video of that's like the biggest. That thing looked like, you ever seen a wood tick swelled up on a summer bear? They're all gray. They've got so much, they've ingested so much blood. They just got these little feeler fingers out there. That's what your bull elk in Alaska look like. So those Kentucky ones sound like another kind of wood tick on a summer bear.
I'm curious about what kind of terrain you have to pack them out of, because Alaska wasn't much fun for packing an elk that big, but I'm guessing Kentucky's probably a little bit more favorable for that.
Well, I guess your definition of terrain type. So long distance, no. Steepness and severity of the hike out, absolutely it can be. So if you've never been to East Kentucky, the place that I would compare it the most to would be like the northern panhandle of Idaho, like up around Coeur d'Alene. When you think about that, those mountains are not real tall, but they're stacked in tight, they're extremely dense, and they're very steep. And that's kind of how Eastern Kentucky is on a natural landscape. So, you're going to deal with some very steep terrain that's really hard to navigate. They're just not 10,000 feet high.
Well, just it says here in the plan, human land use within the elk restoration zone has resulted in a landscape of approximately 80% deciduous forest, which I think when people think about Kentucky, they aren't thinking 80% forest, 10% active and reclaimed surface mine, 9% agriculture. That's and 1% urban matrix. You don't think of that when you think of Kentucky. But then, like you said, you go back into way back in the pioneer days, and there were a lot of elk back there. The elk were the number one deer species across North America back in that time, and a lot of places, a lot of different sites in Kentucky are named with elk names. And it's so awesome to see things come full circle, true conservation taking place.
Yeah, when you look at our landscape and how the state's set up, and knowing, like you referred to, the place names, Corey, that we know we had elk all across the state. Where they were probably the largest populations were in the central and western portion, because that's where our grasslands are, our open area, the kind of the horse country, if you will, of the state. And then as you move west into our ag. But in eastern Kentucky, that's where the elk are. It's predominantly a closed canopy forest system. When the settlers were moving across the country, they came through Cumberland Gap, which is a very prominent gap. When you read about Boone or Dr. Thomas Walker, they're going to talk about that. Our elk are right there in Cumberland Gap, right around that area, and to the north and the west of there. They weren't there in high numbers. They were probably there around the creeks and the riparian areas, but in the mountains, probably not a lot. They were I'm sure they keyed in on the chestnut when the chestnut was here, and they probably migrated in and ate that when they were dropping in the fall. But what we would guess, there's probably not a lot of great elk habitat outside of mast production in the fall in most of eastern Kentucky.
So what's their habitat preference now in that spot?
Oh, so perfect segue. So that would have been pre the Civil War, native elk, native eastern elk. Now, because of the mining industry, we have early successional grassland habitat. So this is where most of our coal comes from in the state. And most of that is a pretty high layer of coal. So they're getting that, they're extracting that mineral through surface reclamation or surface mining. Mm-hmm. So they're removing the tops of the hills, the mountains, accessing that coal, and then reclaiming it. And then in that reclamation process, it comes back as a grassland, an early successional, which is phenomenal for elk. And I mean the amount of mining in those elk zone, and then the elk zone was tremendous. And so we were able to put them back on a landscape that was conducive for elk, that they probably weren't at near that density, but because of what man has done and man created, we're able to go there.
So now as that successional process continues, how do you keep that as more of a grassland compared to the encroachment of a deciduous forest?
Great question. And that is, for us, something we really have to key in on and think about. And, we also have competing interests as an agency. I'm an elk nut. I'm going to push elk and think about that. But we also have vocal folks who want to see this go back to what it was, as a forested landscape. And so you have the competing interest, and then also, our elk zone's 4.1 million acres, so twice the size of Yellowstone. How do we manage that to keep that early successional? It doesn't move as quick from grasslands to hardwoods because of that mining industry, so it's a lot slower process, but it still does happen. And so we're really struggling with that on how we do that as an agency, how we work with our partners to maintain those grasslands. There are other animals besides elk that we care about, and a lot of those are threatened and endangered species, like different songbirds that really need that habitat, that they've kind of made that their home too. So, we're trying to piggyback with that and say, for some of these ground nesting birds, this habitat is important as well. So it's a variety of different species that we're trying to use to try to help manage that and set the succession back.
Is a controlled burn feasible in the dense areas of the east? It's a common tool out here in the west, but we don't have the population densities, and we have different landscapes.
We do, but also going back to its competing interest as well. So one, just the scale. How much can we actually physically implement fire on a given year? And then two, in the process of reclamation, there's what's called bond release, where they put up money to for the reclamation process, and it has to essentially be 100% out of bond before you can put fire on it. You think about it, you're putting fire on it, you're removing all the vegetation, which is going to increase your chances of erosion. So now we have us as Department of Fish and Wildlife having to work with our sister agency of the Surface Mine and the Department of Natural Resources on what that looks like and our timing of it. So we do have a lot of hurdles or challenges to work through that, but we're making an attempt. We have what's called the Eastern Kentucky Habitat Initiative, where we're pushing to do more management on those areas to try to keep what's open, at least at this point.
What's the percentage of private versus public land in the elk zone?
So another opportunity or challenge. So, when you look at us as an agency, I guess we need to define our terms first off. So elk zone, 4.1 million acres. Of that, what is truly public owned is very, very little. We as an agency only own probably a couple thousand acres. And then the Daniel Boone has, which is a national forest, has a couple 100,000 acres that they have. And so it's not a lot. And we knew that going in. And so we realized that we're about to turn an elk, a large ungulate on the landscape that people are going to want to go hunt. And how are you going to hunt if there's no public land? So we had to get creative right out of the gate to try to do private-public partnerships to where we could work with our landowners to establish hunting on private lands. And we've been very successful at doing that and being very creative at creating partnerships. And we have 300,000 or 400,000 acres enrolled in that in prime elk habitat, where our hunters go and hunt. That's open to the public. And it's open to the public for elk hunting, but it's also open to the public if you want to go turkey hunt or grouse hunt or small game hunt, squirrel hunt, you name it. It's public access, and it's treated like public opportunities for anybody to go enjoy.
Wow,
that's one thing I think those of us who live in the West, we take for granted. That it exists, and I'll just go out on the BLM or the Forest Service, and you get to your part of the world, Gabe, and it's like, all right, we don't have that luxury, so how do we get creative? We can wish for a different reality, but here's the reality we're dealing with. Yeah. And it's interesting.
I've got to touch on one program that's kind of all related to the issuance of an elk tag. I mean, that's the draw, right? People want to hunt, an elk. So we have a lot of big landowners, big conglomerates, coal companies that own lots of land or control a lot of the amount of land. So for every 5,000 acres that you enroll into a public hunting area agreement, we will give you one fully transferable either sex elk tag to be used on that property. And you get that every year. And so that's a pretty good carrot for them. That they get a tag and that it's fully transferable, so they could sell it, use it, give it away, whatever have you that they choose. And then the public gets that land to go out and recreate on and hunt on.
Yeah. How many 5,000 acre parcels are there in Kentucky, though? That's a big parcel anywhere.
We've got over 300,000 acres in that program, so it's a lot.
Wow.
And we've seen some folks that kind of have a co-op where they, I've got a couple thousand, I got a couple thousand, and they'll go in together to try to get to that 5,000 mark and then share the tag. And so that's things that we see. We've done we have similar programs if you want to allow us to come capture some elk. So we haven't really talked about us moving and capturing elk, but we'll get to that, I'm sure. But we have lots of different ways to get what we need accomplished with the issuance of elk tags for public hunting.
What's the primary use of the private land of those bigger blocks that are signing up for access? I'm guessing it's not agriculture for a lot of them.
No. No, it pretty much is either timber or natural resources of some sort, whether it's natural gas or coal. When I started in the early 2000s, coal was just booming and boomed all the way through the national recession. But then after the national recession went through in 07, 08, and that we kind of rebounded as a country, the coal industry really started tanking after that. And that industry is pretty much gone, unfortunately, in Kentucky and really the whole eastern U.S. And they've pretty much pulled out. I mean, I can name just one or two active jobs, and they're sitting on those. They're sitting on those hoping that the market will rebound or hold on them, and they change hands fairly often now. So, it's kind of a weird state with them and what those industries are going to do. But it's also allowed us to get into some places that traditionally they wouldn't have let us because they were mining and blowing up the mountains.
So does that represent an opportunity for you where you can come in and say, hey, you have this property, times are kind of tough in your industry, here's some ways we can work with you to maybe get more utility out of the property, for lack of a better way of saying it?
Absolutely. That was one of our goals, is trying to reach out. So, we went to all of our large landowners, identified who they were, and really started pushing them to say, hey, you got all this land. Why don't you sign up and let some people recreate on it, get an elk tag, and do that. And that's kind of why it's been successful, is we've been very proactive with trying to identify those landowners and then go after them to try to get them to work with us. And it is a challenge. We are the government, and that's an industry that's kind of a little timid of the government, but we're not the mining industry. We're here about the elk and the hunting and recreation. And really, once you have that conversation, get in the room, it really aligns real well. Just getting them on the phone, getting them in person is the key.
How many elk tags do you guys give out in a year?
So we're a little over 600 right now. That's ebbed and flowed from as high as a little over 1,000, to the very beginning when we issued 12. So 600 is kind of what we have settled on, if you will, over the last couple of years. That seems to work well for us and what our hunters and our expectations are. So that's where we are right now.
Huh. Man, I must be sending you the wrong $10 bill with my application. I think isn't that what it is for us non-residents, Corey? Yep. $10 or something like that. And you guys
can
televise
for all four seasons, can't you?
Yeah, so it is $10. Doesn't matter if you're a resident or non-resident.
Okay.
You can apply for an either sex archery tag, or a bull firearms tag, or cow firearms tag. And then we also have a youth tag that kiddos can apply for, and they can apply for the regular permits as well. So they have the choice to apply for all four, but us adults just get the 3.
Wow. Isn't your deadline April 30th?
April 30th. So coming up.
I was going to lie and say, isn't your deadline June 1st? And everybody goes in May.
Well, we've already missed the deadline, right? Yeah, for our hunters in. Yeah, like for us, that's going to work out great. But for everybody else, no.
They'll forget about it by next year anyway. So yeah, we didn't time this very good.
You should have talked in June or May, right?
There you go. Well, I would say for me, Gabe, if you told me there's one elk tag on the planet that I could pick, I would pick a Kentucky elk tag. Cool. So I'm hoping someday my $10 bill, you guys stream it online, and I wait for my name, and it's kind of like a bad Christmas that you got a lump of coal for Christmas.
And it's kind of funny, but it's the way we really do like the system that we have, because it's cheap. And $10 you spend that on a Big Mac and fries at McDonald's these days. So we want there to be interest. We want to celebrate in that and give people the opportunities. And for a while we used the hunt of a lifetime kind of tagline. That's really not what we want it to be, but as interest has grown, and as cheap as it is, we had almost 100,000 applications last year for those tags, and that's good for us. And when you look at the numbers, you guys understand that 100,000 applications only issuing 600 permits. There's really not a system out there that would work except the chance that we have.
Yeah,
and so it's a donation and a hope that maybe one day you'll get picked.
Yeah. Well, don't develop some of these elaborate point schemes that the West has come up with. They're nothing but a house of cards tilted in the favor of old gray-haired farts like me. And
yep.
If Kentucky goes to a point system of any sort, I'm going to take back all the good things I've said about you, Gabe.
Well, that's what I always go like. Honestly, people are just bad at math, and then I'll roll with like, let's just use some simple numbers, right? Like, all right, so we issue 600 tags, 250 of them are bull tags, and we had 50,000 people apply. So if you do a preference point system, how many years is it going to take to move through it all?
Yeah.
And like, so my grandkids, and I don't even have, my kids are 9 and 7. They're never going to have a chance to hunt elk because they missed the first year. It's just, when you put it in those terms, like, oh yeah, I kind of see that. Like it's Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying I have a chance, right? That's pretty much it.
Well, you're talking to an accountant and an engineer here,
right?
Gabe, so
right.
I think we can understand what you mean with those numbers.
Exactly.
We may not be good at much, but at least we
understand that, right?
Yeah, we can handle math. So when you have this much private land, do you end up with a lot of conflicts caused now that you got this robust elk herd? Are you ending up with having to address conflicts more than you thought, about what you thought, some you didn't see coming?
I think it's probably less than what we thought. If you were to go back and ask my predecessors, what do you think? A lot of them would say, man, we're making a big mistake. You're going to deal with problems for a long time. We really haven't seen that. Where we started to see some problems was before we started ramping up our hunting pressure, when we were only issuing 100 tags, a couple hundred tags, and they were starting to get in people's gardens. They were kind of hang out by the road and cause those issues. And then we wanted to set the standard of, we're going to hunt these elk. These are here for recreational opportunities, both consumptive and non-consumptive, but we're going to manage with hunting. And it kind of goes back to our original conversation. We started in 97 through 2002, but we had our first hunt in 2001. So we were still releasing elk, and we started hunting them because we wanted to set that standard right out of the gate. Like, we're going to hunt these critters. And cool. So that's good. And we started having those problems, and we increased pressure and put some direct pressure on them by putting hunters right there with them. We have a very good relationship with our hunters. When they're drawn, they talk to us, and we talk to them frequently. And we had that connection with the landowners, like, hey, this guy's dealing with some problems, put you in contact, and we were able to send home a happy hunter, and the landowner had the problem taken care of. And so, that, and then also they really respond well to pressure. You put a little bit of fear into them, and they're going to move, and that works well. Dumb ones go into the freezer, and the smart ones run off. Success, right?
Yeah, you don't get to pass on that genetic defect if you stand around and
here, right?
Yeah. So within that 4.1 million acre recovery zone, I saw the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation film the other day.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like you guys are trying to disperse and move elk within that recovery zone. Are there some areas that are still unoccupied?
So that film and that project that we just wrapped up was really, in my mind, the last step in this process. Now, we had, how many release sites? 7 or 8 release sites where we released the western elk on the landscape. And that was pretty much at the point when I came on. We check mark, yep, they're here in Kentucky, we're happy. But they were pretty fat and sassy and lazy. They had everything they needed. They had food, they had water, they had shelter, very little hunting pressure, and they just weren't moving. out of the release areas like we wanted. And so to us, it was, well, if they're not going to move, we're going to move them as well to try to help that process. And so, we jump right in and start catching them. And we've moved elk across the elk zone to establish new micro herds, if you will, in certain areas to help fully distribute elk across the 16 county zone. And this last one that we did was really the biggest move. It was a pretty good distance, and when you look at our zone, we initially had it as 14 counties, and when we reevaluated that in 2004 and added 2 counties to the very far west that in theory would link with the Tennessee elk population that they have down there. And so we really didn't have elk there. It was kind of this corridor, when you think multi-state elk herds in 20, 30 years and 50 years, that's that setting that up for success. And, we'd kind of moved elk everywhere else. We'd had some discussions with National Forest, the McCreary County where those elk went. It's 70% public land, and there weren't any elk. And so for us, it's like, man, we got to get them over there. But we were working through other priorities that we needed to handle first as a program to get to that point. And really, the stars aligned again to where we were kind of wrapping up all the other projects. We had the resources, we had the places to get them, and the Daniel Boone came along, our local governments came along, and we're, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, for all that they do, partnered with us and said, what, we'll help foot the bill, because we couldn't have done it without them. Helped us do all of that. So, once again, just a beautiful marriage where things aligned, and we were able to get the project done.
Now you got elk everywhere. Do you dare tell the world how many elk you got, Gabe?
No, we dare not. Right?
No. Okay. All right. We'll just stick with 10,000. Wasn't that your population objective?
Yeah, we're definitely at the original objective. And so that's when people ask me that question, where I usually go is when we brought them in, the agreement was 10,000 elk. But what does 10,000 elk really look like? We don't really know, right? You kind of get this vision of what they would standing on the hillside, but until they were here and they were, people got used to them, and the fear of the damage and the negative side of elk, we really, really needed to see what works. And, we hit that level and we weren't experiencing the problems that we thought we might, and people were happy. And so for us, it's just kind of testing those waters. And I said this a lot, that, we were in restoration. Now we're in management, and we're trying to figure out what management of elk looks like in Kentucky. We can't compare how Colorado or Idaho or Utah manages elk and apply that here in Kentucky. It's completely different. It's apples and oranges. And so, we'll do something and try it. If it works, great. If not, we might adapt and move on to something different. And so we got that. And then the expectations of our landowners and our hunters, from nobody's hardly ever hunted elk in Kentucky to now, you go to the sporting goods store or, go hang out where hunters frequent, good chances somebody's elk hunted in Kentucky there. And now we have that history, that brotherhood and sisterhood of elk hunting. And so your expectations change. Just like you guys, when you went on your first hunt, you harvested an elk, you were stoked. Now it's like, man, I think I can do a little bit better. And so now what they're expecting looks different. And that's great for us.
Now, you mentioned, management being different between the western states and back there. What, we've got all sorts of predation and depredation, winter mortality. What do you deal with in Kentucky? Because I'm guessing winter kill's probably not a huge issue. Is there predation on elk? What are some of those factors?
So, good question. Most of the predation is humans and us in our hunting efforts. We've looked at cow-calf and all the different research parameters that you can, and even adult bulls on what's killing them. It's the bow and arrow and bullet that's killing them by hunters. That's the main driving force. We have a little bit of disease. We're fortunate in Kentucky where we have not found chronic wasting disease, and we've been looking hard for it as a state, but not found it. So thankful that it's not here. What disease we do have? It's called brainworm. It's a disease that elk have that white-tailed deer have. That they're not affected by it, but our elk herd is negatively affected by it. And through time, we have seen resistance, and that number of elk that are impacted by that parasite has decreased. So we're seeing that's positive. As far as predation, when we first started bringing elk into Kentucky, we had very few, if any, black bear. Our bear population is growing now. Where we have a bear season now, we're hunting bears and chasing bears, and I'm sure they take a few elk calves over the years as we have largened our elk herd, broadened their geographic extent, and also seen an increase in our bear population. So, but it's at a very minimal level. Right now, we have a big research project where we're looking at cow reproduction and calf mortality. So we're reevaluating the data that we use in our model, and that's a 3-year project. And they touched a little bit about that on the RMEF video. That was kind of a partnership. Why we were catching elk in the first place was for that. So kind of investigating a lot of those natal information for us to help us better manage. So long story, not a lot, and we have very easy winters. I mean, we've had 4 or 5 snowfalls this year for a couple inches, so it's pretty easy for us.
Man,
what about traffic mortality, vehicle collision?
Not many. Probably 20 to 40 a year that are hit on the road. It's fairly stable. I know when you look at that landscape, there's really 1 or 2 main thoroughfares that go through there, and the rest of them are fairly small, very curvy roads, and just doesn't allow for a lot of vehicular traffic and high rates of speed. And we're fortunate in that aspect for low numbers.
Very cool.
Well,
I've been driving for 32 years, and I've never hit an elk until 3 nights ago. I actually hit 2 of them.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
We're coming back from spring break and driving. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and came around the corner, and there were 2 of them on the left shoulder of the road. And so I immediately braked and swerved right, thinking that they would hopefully go away. And they ran straight at me, and there was nothing I could do.
Oh, anyone get hurt?
Nope, just the elk. And I have never felt such remorse. Like it's amazing. You go hunting, and of course, you feel, you recognize you're taking the life when you're hunting, but I'm out there hunting with the purpose and the intent to do that. Yeah. Driving and killing an elk, I felt like guilty. I felt like I should maybe consider not buying a tag this fall because I just took an elk, and it didn't take too long to get over that. But it was it was a different feeling for sure.
I love to expound on that. For the non-hunter, they don't really understand, but it puts it in perspective. Like, I care a lot about these critters. I mean, it's my life work to do this, but also I love to hunt them. I love to harvest them. I love to eat them. And it's a very odd dynamic to try to explain to folks. For this group, we understand that fully, right? But for some folks, it's like, how do you do that? But it's definitely a love, just a very deep respect for them.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you're not going to jinx me, Corey, when I say I've so far lucked out and not hit one. I almost shouldn't say that because we know it's going to happen. But so, Gabe, you guys have been kind of the seed stock for a lot of other relocations and augmentation of some of the eastern elk herd. And I wonder if people realize how important your CWD exempt, or whatever you'd call it, non-CWD status is for the importance of having a disease-free elk herd for the purposes of augmenting other populations.
Right. So that's a big part of that. We have been the source population for a handful of reestablishments, restoration, or augmentation for herds. And that's one major player, is that we don't have CWD in our deer or elk herds. And then also just the proximity. If you're going to move elk and restore elk in the east, it's a lot cheaper and closer to come to Kentucky as it is to drive to another western state. And so that has afforded us the opportunity to really pay it forward. Now, if it wasn't for our western sister states and sister agencies helping us and giving us elk free of charge, we wouldn't have the resources that we do. And I mean, that's what we as an agency and Fish and Wildlife agencies did for a century, is trading and moving elk. And this is just kind of that next iteration. So, when states came to us and said, would you help? It was absolutely. We're glad to help. We have a growing population. We're happy with this. And the request wasn't high as far as the number of elk over the years, even though a lot of folks say it's, thousands of elk. It's not. And, we've helped augment the herd in Wisconsin, and we have helped establish an elk population in the state of Virginia and Missouri. And if my numbers are right off the top of my head, it's like 322 elk have gone to those three states. So it's not a lot, but you look at what that's done for the residents of those states and the opportunities that's afforded it. But absolutely. I mean, that to me is a career highlight, to be able to be a part of those restoration efforts, to see those things replicated in those states that we got to enjoy here in Kentucky. So really cool projects.
Well, I'm the oldest guy on this call, so when I speak in terms of age, I guess it covers everybody's lifespan. But for me, I think some people feel this is just me overstating and being, using hyperbole to make a point, but it's not. There's nothing in terms of wildlife restoration, relocation, translocation in my lifetime that even comes close to what you guys did in Kentucky. And what it's created. And I think about that. Okay, I'm 57 years old. In the last half century plus, this is the most remarkable wildlife project undertaken and completed in the last half century, at least, probably longer. And in a very complex landscape. This isn't like, we'll go put these out in the national forest somewhere where there aren't any competing interests. Or we'll go put them out in the sage country of central Wyoming where there's, nobody lives there. No, you got a lot of people who've been on those landscapes for hundreds of years, doing whatever their activity is. And now you say, hey, thanks for letting us put these elk in here. It's for me anyhow, it's remarkable, and it's a compliment to your agency, to all the states that helped out, the nonprofit groups, the citizen volunteers. And if ever there's conservation in action, go read the Kentucky story or go watch the videos about the Kentucky story.
I mean that is it played forth in our lifetime. And like we kind of talked about too, in the aspects of, started in 97, finished in 02. We started hunting in 01 in the middle of it, and have been hunting ever since. And then in 2012, we started catching elk and sending them to another state. So just in 10 years post restoration, we're now paying it forward and sending them off other places to help share the love. So, I think it goes back to the heart of our agency and our desires and excitement for elk and elk in the East.
Yeah. So this is going to be a question I know Corey wants to ask.
I don't want to ask it on the podcast, so
I'll ask it for him. Your elk in Kentucky, do they have the normal cycle of, breeding, estrus, calving that we see out here, where everything is probably going to peak and, plus or minus a few days of mid-September, and the calving peak is going to be, late May, early June?
Yep. So good question. We are just a little bit behind the West. So
really,
I would say that our peak peak breeding is usually the first few days in October, last few days in September. Peak bugling a little before that. It's incredibly hot here still at that point. I mean, in September, it can be 90 every day for a while. And when you're a 800-pound, 900-pound critter coming out in the daylight is not real encouraging, even if it's in the middle of the breeding season, right? So, I'm sure that's got a little bit to do with it. But we are looking at our data. We're probably a little behind most of the West in that by a couple weeks. So you can hunt in the West and then just extend that fun on to the East.
There you go, Corey.
What we do, right? So, I want to be out in your guys' neck of the woods in early September and then be, done and then back here and jump right in with our hunters and be there. So it's great to extend the elk rut for us and what we get to be a part of.
What are the season dates for the archery season and the firearms?
So we do hunt fairly early. We have a 2-week archery season that comes in the second Saturday in September. And then the first rifle comes in the last Saturday in September. And then we have a second rifle that comes in the first Saturday in October.
I know where I'm going.
Yeah. So any of those tags, then you've got a chance to hunt the rut with each of those seasons.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Can you hunt with a bow during the firearm season, or is it strictly firearm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can use any legal weapon to hunt an elk. So if you're drawn for firearms and want to take archery equipment, by all means, we have hunters that do that.
Yeah. Very cool.
Corey, you think they respond to calls the same way?
Oh, I can answer that.
I would imagine with the success of the population growth and the tight management and the bull-to-cow ratios and the limited hunting opportunities, I can only imagine how they respond.
I'll tell a little story just in that. I mean, I'm growing up working here before, I guess I started working here before I ever took my first trip to the West to elk hunt, and kind of was experiencing where they're blowing the bugle tube 24/7, all day long here when we first started, and those bulls don't know what they're doing and just screaming back at you. And then go west and go hunt an over-the-counter unit, and you pull out the bugle tube, they're gone, man. It's such a night and day difference on that behavior and a little bit of humble pie. Like, I thought I could blow the tube. I mean, and no. I mean, you go out there, so more respect to you and your abilities, guys, and what you're able to pull off. But we definitely have educated our elk to where, if you just squeal on that thing a little bit, they would go to bugling back at you. And now, like, you're not going to hear nothing anymore. They've wised up.
Well, Corey, you got to promise me this. If you ever draw an elk tag in Kentucky, you'll let me come along and just be the camp cook or something, because
you're welcome to be a camp cook anytime I have an elk tag.
I know. I don't want to in other places.
Oh, it's only in Kentucky. I see.
Only in Kentucky.
And the good thing is he could be camp cook and have you at a McDonald's every night in less than an hour, probably. So for Randy, it's going to be easy. So Corey, you're getting shorted on this one, buddy.
Well, Randy wouldn't go to McDonald's. He'd at least upgrade to a Dairy Queen for me.
There you go. We got some of them. That'll work.
Yeah, but I'll make the same offer to you, Corey. If I draw in Kentucky, if they take my $10, you can come and call elk for me, and I'll still be the camp cook.
Okay, well that works even better.
I just hate to deprive you of the chance to come and call in a big bull elk in Kentucky.
Yeah.
But, the reason I said it that way is now you're going to get an invitation from everybody who draws an elk tag in Kentucky this year. Corey, will you come and call for me? You didn't even. You had no idea I was setting you up like that.
I can. Yeah. Thanks, Randy. So outside of the draw, though, what other opportunities are there to obtain an elk tag?
So we also have. We issue 10 governor's tags. We don't call them governor's tag. We call them commission tags, but they're issued by our board to Kentucky conservation organizations where they raffle those and sell them here in the state. So that's one avenue. And then the landowner tags that we talked about, where we give them for public access. And there's probably 30 to 40 of those as well. So above and beyond the 600 that we issue, another 40 or so that are out there for other opportunities to try to acquire.
Well, that's interesting, because in my home state of Montana, we give away 15% of our tags to landowners, and we don't get any access for them.
Yeah.
It just was. So I admire that you guys are getting something for them, and you're figuring out a way of how to get, you're tying it to, hey, you want to get a better use of your land and share this resource. We'll make it worth your while, and the public benefits, because in a place with that much private land, what else would you do?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So do you guys have any state wildlife management areas that, I know you said you only have like a few thousand acres of deeded land. Do you have other properties that you lease or you can otherwise?
We do across the state, just not in our elk zone. We've got, I forget how many, well over 100,000 acres that we have that we own and manage as an agency, but just not in the east. And it's a whole nother long conversation, but it really comes back to the rights as far as the mineral and the leasing and the coal and the natural gas and the industry behind it that was so much pre our agency back in the 1800s in the coal and natural gas extraction. So there's a very complex ownership, and if we owned the land but didn't have rights to the mineral, and then the mineral company came in and just reclaimed it or took it all off, that really wouldn't be available for hunters. So it's kind of a complex issue for us in that part of the state.
Huh. Well, that's too bad, because now that the Land and Water Conservation Fund is fully funded and fully appropriated to the tune of $900 million, I think we need to start nominating some Kentucky projects for that funding.
Right. And you're right. And I think this is a kind of a perfect segue into some other things that we're now trying to find ways to buy some of this land. When you look at the industry is kind of gone for right now. There's not a lot of active coal mining. A lot of these are just being held right now. So we're trying to jump in there and purchase where we can and work with other partners and entities to try to help us. And that gets back to RMEF and their mission to purchase and help gain access and other partners that we have to try to help us protect some of these properties and have them into the permanent public access.
Yeah. Well, rumor has it that you guys are working on one of those to the tune of 55,000 acres. Am I allowed to? Am I spilling the beans here?
Absolutely. So that's one that we're working on, and our legislature's looking at that as well, and to support that. So we're watching it. We're excited for that opportunity. But man, 55,000 acres that would be ours or in public access, whether that's us or forestry or whatever partner that we have. But that would be a phenomenal opportunity to have for all Kentuckians and all folks.
Yeah. Can I sick all of our Kentucky listeners on your legislature to pass your bill? What is
Absolutely.
it? Senate Bill, what, 217 or something like that?
You got it.
Okay. I don't want to get you in trouble, Gabe. I know you work for the state and you guys got to be kind of walk that line. But if you're from Kentucky, find out what that is and request support for it, because 55,000 acres of permanent perpetual access east of the Mississippi is unbelievable in my head, because I know how hard it would be to do 55,000 acres in the vast West landscapes.
Yep.
And then you put that back east, it's like, holy cow, somebody make sure this happens.
Yeah, that opportunity is once in a lifetime. Really it is, on something that large.
Yeah. So I think it's a testament to your agency thinking about these things and being creative. And when you talk to agency people, a lot of folks are like, oh, those folks in Kentucky, they're they're thinking about stuff. They're not afraid to experiment. And I think the results you guys have and what you can show for your work on a very complicated public-private ownership, mostly private, supports the position of respect that your peers in the agency world have for what you guys have accomplished. Corey's looking at something.
Oh, I thought we froze. Yep.
Yeah, what the audience doesn't see that Gabe and I can see, I think Corey right now is looking at the draw odds and looking at his calendar to see what
I'm looking to see if there's a list. His computer. What I'm looking at is a list of the those 10 commissioner tags to see where they're available at.
That is on our website.
Yeah, so Corey's going to go buy more raffle tickets.
Yep.
Yeah. Hey. Well, don't tell anyone where they are, Corey. You and I will buy the raffle tickets.
I thought that was the question you were going to ask Gabe earlier when you said, I won't make you ask it, I'll ask for you. I thought you were going to ask him how to get a tag, and I thought, we don't want to spill the beans on the podcast. So, no, and I asked if there were other ways to obtain a tag. It definitely piqued my interest.
Yeah.
I've never won a raffle in my life, but I've made a lot of donations. So
that's where Randy, you and I are a lot alike on that aspect, man. I'm unlucky as all get out when it comes to those things.
But someone who does that clean living like Corey does, he probably, Tell me which raffle you're putting in for, Corey. I don't want to put in for that one because a guy like you would pull the tag or something.
I was going to say, I only put in for raffles that I know I'm going to win, so.
Well, Gabe, you guys work on a 15-year elk conservation strategy. What's the future of elk look like, or management of elk, whatever you want to talk about? And it's always hard to predict what's over the horizon a year or 2 or 5 years, but you must have some ideas of what's coming down the pipe.
When we sat down to write that plan, it was, like I said, it's a 15-year plan, and we published it in 2015, runs from 15 to 30. We were, post restoration, in the middle of moving elk to a handful of other states, needing to redo some of our population metrics and research. I said this a lot when we were drafting this, was we've moved out of restoration. We're now into management. What does that management look like? And we know what it looks like now, but how do we gauge into the future and seeing where we've been in 15 years to where we want to go in 15 years? And that was definitely a challenge to think about it. And, of course, access, habitat, those are your top two. And then to me, disease and population dynamics follows right in there behind it. And knowing that we have very little public land and we expect this population to grow, we have to continue to expand upon that. We hear a lot about our modeling and better understanding our number and delving that deeper than just a statewide number and helping us better manage at a local level. Were all things that we were kind of dealing with and working on at the time that we wrote it. So I think it's kind of heavy-handed in that, knowing habitat would be very, very key and very big. For us as our elk managers, also habitat wasn't really our expertise. And myself and our few biologists, we were mainly researchers. We have another arm of our agency that does habitat, but we needed to connect them with us to where we had both of those players kind of working collectively on elk management. A lot of our staff were thinking grouse and quail and turkeys and management for that. And a lot of that is similar, but focusing on the East, focusing on private land were keys for us in that drafting. And then the other low-hanging fruit in my mind was the non-consumptive side of it is, we're all elk hunters and most of us are on this podcast, but, that's something that really had not taken off. And there was a great opportunity for that. And with the economy in Eastern Kentucky, anything would help. And, that drives the value of these animals, the interest, and helps that population flourish if there's more than just a hunting aspect. and a deeper appreciation for them. So seeing that industry grow, and we've seen some changes in that, all kind of is another factor that we wanted to expand upon.
That puts a lot of value on what elk represent and how much they're contributing to the state. Heck, sounds like your agency is more of an economic development agency than a wildlife agency.
I mean, it's part of it, right? Like what we do brings in that. And, as a manager, you have to talk about that. And depending on your audience, if you're talking to the local hunter, it's about hunting. But if you're talking to a senator or representative here in Kentucky, they need to see both sides, the hunting, but also the economic impact. And we survey our hunters every year, and we ask them, like, what did you spend money on? Where did you spend it? And try to get a feel for the amount of money that goes into Eastern Kentucky. And it's, the tune of a couple $1 million that hunters spend in those 16 counties, just elk hunting alone. And what a tremendous resource that brings in for them. So, all great things that the program does, and having elk here that they really didn't think about, on the surface, at least, when they were doing this.
Yeah. Corey, I got a question for you.
Uh-oh.
How would you hunt these elk in a deciduous forest? Because that's what all these Kentucky tag holders want to know is, what would Corey do?
Well, the good news is Gabe compared it to North Idaho, which is where I grew up. So I don't know. I mean, it's easy to say sitting here, but I would imagine with them being probably as vocal as they are, it probably wouldn't be overly difficult to locate elk in Kentucky during the rut. And I would be as aggressive as you possibly could with calling. And Gabe's nodding his head, so I'm guessing I'm somewhere close to the mark there. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, I like hunting them in the middle of the day, putting them to bed, and just getting right up on them in that timber. They're going to retreat into the timber. I'm an archery hunter like you, Corey. I mean, that's what my favorite thing to do is archery elk hunt, and so I'm going to let them kind of go to bed and let them hit the beds, and then sneak in, play the wind, usually some sort of mid slope, and just get in on them as tight as I can before I give away my position, and then bugle in his face and get him to come running in. That's kind of the mentality. It's hard. It's very humbling because you're in a deciduous, closed canopy, crunchy forest that it's hard to sneak up on them. But you get a little rain or a little bit of fog and can quiet that forest floor down and find them. That's a ton of fun to get them in where they're sleeping.
You're talking my language now.
Yep.
Gabe, one of these episodes gets about 50,000 downloads in the first week, so you probably got 50,000 new applicants.
Awesome. Awesome.
And everyone's like,
sorry,
great, guys.
Yeah, just increased your odds.
You just screwed up the odds for everybody else. So. Just don't let people know where those raffles are, Corey. Man, that's probably our only hope.
I know. No, but I mean, and I look at it, I apply in several states, and Kentucky is definitely the least expensive one. And for me, it goes to a good cause. I mean, I know I'll probably never draw it, and my odds are better of winning the Powerball probably and just going and buying a tag in Kentucky, but it goes to the right place. And this is, I mean, what Gabe has just laid out for us, the model of conservation and restoration and wildlife management. I think it's worth $30 from all of us to apply with the hopes of getting a tag, but really know that what we're doing is supporting that conservation and making that piece of pie bigger.
And it's also one thing when we talked about going big, for the most part, license sales from elk hunters and the applications pretty much pays for the program.
Yeah.
And
really?
That's really great to be able to say that it supports our staff, it supports our research, and it's not a negative impact to our agency. And that can't be said by most of the states in the East. And so that's good to be able to offer that. We're not about making money, but you also, license dollars are what foot the bill here in our state. We don't receive any general fund monies. So those license dollars and excise taxes are what help keep the lights on and keep the research moving. So that's big for us to be able to have that engagement and opportunities in the future.
Well, we're gonna get blamed, Corey, if the number of applicants goes anywhere north of 100,000, which you said it was last year, Gabe.
Yep, just a little under 100. So
a little under 100.
Under 100.
Okay, so if it breaks the 100, Corey and I are going to get all the grief over that. So.
Well, it's a perfect year for us to break the 100,000 mark. It's our 25th year anniversary. So we've had elk on the landscape. So what a perfect celebration for us is to have that interest. And, you think about it, 100,000 people, but, you'd be surprised how many Kentuckians don't even know we have elk. And that's just crazy to me. They don't even realize we got them in this state. Increasing that awareness and support of that is one of our kind of task and what we want to increase.
Well, one other part to this is you've mentioned RMEF quite a few times, and I'm sure there's been plenty of partners that helped out. Corey and I are big advocates for being members of RMEF. Is it fair to say RMEF was one of the critical forces behind the effort to help you guys get to where you are today?
I don't know what the word I would use, but beyond significant, instrumental, couldn't have done it without them from day one until, right now in this minute that we're in. I mean, I can't think of a better partner in anything that we do as far as elk, but just everything. That's the thing that I appreciate so much about RMEF is their willingness to engage, their willingness to get volunteers excited and be a part of it, but also support elk and all the other aspects of wildlife. It's just, I think the world of them and sing that tune just like you guys every opportunity that I get. When I talk elk, RMEF is right there behind it and the importance of them and what they're able to do all across the country. And yeah, they're in the West, but man, they're active and busy in every state, and we got chapters in states that don't even have elk. And look at those banquets, and look at that fundraising they do. It really is phenomenal.
Well, that's good to know. I think RMEF at times gets criticism. Why are you messing around with elk in the East? Well, this is why. Because it's such a highlight event. It's the right thing to do. It creates vested interest in wild things that people maybe had just written off as, there'll never be elk on the landscapes I live on. And here we are, right? We got elk in Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Missouri, North Carolina. I might have missed somebody.
Dakotas.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the Dakotas.
Yeah, the Dakotas, Minnesota. It's I would have never dreamed that as a young person that we'd have as many elk across the landscape, not just in terms of number, but in terms of different locations as we do today.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, Randy talks a lot about that piece of the pie and how, it's so important that we bring new hunters in and we get people passionate and excited about elk and elk hunting, and it increases the opportunity for hunting. Yes, that's important, but I think just that perpetuation of that opportunity that our next generations, our children and grandchildren, are going to get to see that and be a part of it, where if there weren't departments like yours, Gabe, and if there weren't organizations like the Elk Foundation working, years ago, 40 years ago or more, with the foresight to see what was to come and protecting that opportunity, we would lose it for sure. And so it's exciting to see in my lifetime. I mean, I was alive before the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation was organized, not by a lot, but a little bit. And just to see the work they've done in my lifetime and the work that hunters have done and contributed to, and to see the love and the passion they have for elk and the desire to preserve that and conserve that is just, that's exciting. That makes me want to do more and keep doing more.
And one aspect that we really haven't talked about in Kentucky specific that I think is a little different is that so many people apply and they put in their significant others, their kids, and everybody with the thought of, wow, I'll never get drawn. But then they do. And, so many times as a biologist and coordinator with it, like, I get called and like, my husband or my wife put me in, and I've hardly ever hunted, and now what do I do? Like, I've never been elk hunting before. I never dreamed I would get drawn. And it's like they get to learn how to do this all over. And they've probably hunted deer maybe when they were younger, but it's the excitement, it's the enthusiasm, it's the overwhelmness. Also just the number of people that I've talked to that never really were interested in deer hunting and got drawn for the elk hunt. It's bizarre to me that came to hunting through elk hunting in Kentucky, and we deal with those routinely every year of hunters who called that are looking for help and looking for advice that have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And I'm like, "Oh, you have no idea. You're hooked now." So,
well, we're grateful and fortunate for all the people who have had their shoulder to the wheel for more than just the 25 years that elk have been on your landscape. There's a lot of planning and coordination and building support before that ever happened. And here we are, the beneficiaries of it. I think that's always been remarkable to me, is how in the hunting world there is this view of the next generation and the next generation. And for me, it goes back to when I read about Roosevelt and all of his speeches. Yeah. He'd talk about those yet in the womb of time, or the hunter yet unborn. And there's going to be people 30 years from now chasing elk in Kentucky who were those hunters in the womb of time in 1997 when these elk were released. And to me, it's cool. Not into warm and fuzzies, but I'd say this kind of stuff is warm and fuzzy.
It's pretty close to it. That's for sure.
Well, what else you got, Corey? We broke Gabe away from his real job for a couple hours here. Anything
I've got a list of questions for once we finish the podcast. I have a list of questions for him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good because I got them for you guys. I've been working on my draw stuff too. So if we're going to do this, and we're going to play both sides of it now. I dusted off my Excel spreadsheet for a state that's closing up here real soon on what I'm going to do. So yeah.
Well, Gabe, I got a pretty busy fall this year, but I could probably clean that slate a little bit if you needed some help packing your elk out or something.
Okay. All right.
So I'd make that offer to you. And with Corey, I only offer to be the camp cook because I know where he goes. He's drugged me through some of those places before. It's like, I don't need this anymore.
Yeah, I'm out.
He says he offers to be the camp cook. I invited him to go be the camp cook a couple years ago, and he said no.
No, because you told me where you were going and what it would entail, and
I know, but
I'm like, nope.
I told you didn't even have to climb the mountains. Camp. All you had to do was make it into camp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yep. And I told you that if I was going to be your camp cook on that one, the camp meal was going to be like dehydrated foods. So you didn't need me for that. So
I can say, I've done a few Western elk hunts where I've just done that, been a tag along or guide. Man, that. In a weird way, it's kind of refreshing, right? That's all the fun with no pressure. And I've enjoyed the heck out of it. Now, granted, I love shooting them. Don't get me wrong, but I've enjoyed those thoroughly as well.
Well, Gabe, thanks so much for taking time. We wanted to help you guys get the word out about your 25th anniversary and all the great work that you've done. Corey and I wish we would have planned it better and we would have done it after your draw date of April 30th. But, no one's ever accused Corey and I of being the sharpest tool in the shed. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Keep up all the great work. And I'll let you and Corey compare spreadsheets when we get offline.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to you guys and also the offer to come up and tell the Kentucky story. We definitely are passionate about it and care, but I think about all my coworkers and previous coworkers that have, put their blood, sweat, and tears in the elk and very appreciative for them and able to tell their story. So for all of our listeners that tune in, thank you. Thank you for listening and being interested in Kentucky elk for sure.
Well, Corey, this is your pitch where you always tell everybody join rmef.org or else you're not gonna call for them this year.
So if they join, I'm going to call for them? Is that what you just said?
Well, that's kind of the implied promise. You did say something like that one day.
I did not.
Yeah.
If they join the RMEF, I'm going to call for them? You always say you get what you paid back if you don't like it. See, I can't back out of it if you start telling people I'm going to call for them if they join the RMEF.
Corey, if you join the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation at rmef.org, Corey will not call for you, but he promises you'll shoot more elk this year.
Or maybe not this year. Maybe just you'll shoot more elk. We've got to have our attorneys look over this stuff before Randy starts making promises here.
Attorneys, you and I are the attorneys. I know,
that's what I mean.
What kind of overhead do you think we got here? Got a tightwad accountant running the books. I mean, I'm not paying for no attorney. Now, if I'm going to blow money, it's going to be on those raffle tickets that you're going to tell me about as quick as we get off the air here.
That's it exactly. No, it's I think this story, Gabe's story, Kentucky elk, it's a prime example of why it's important to support organizations like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And if you're not a member and you are an elk hunter, you owe it to yourself and to elk to go to rmef.org and sign up to be a member.
And that, folks, is a wrap. Thanks for being here.